Welcome to Life's Rich Tapestry, a podcast exploring the narrative of people's layered lives. Listen in on courageous conversations spoken from the heart. Gain insight into another's life as we tackle compelling topics which will expand your mind, help you gain perspective, and might even inspire you to do things differently. My name is Evelyn, and I look forward to your company. And welcome to another episode of Life's Rich Tapestry. Flowers are a key component of any wedding or special event. They add extra color, texture, and feeling to your special day. Flowers are an important part of creating the feeling or setting the mood with their beauty, color, elegance, and style. The use of flowers is a form of expression and is also used as an element of design. My next guest, Tash, from the Flower Cottage in Wentworth Falls, her arrangements have been described as something out of a Renaissance painting, whimsical, romantic, and wild in spirit. All of her designs are curated to truly fit every client's unique style and bring a touch of magic to your special day. I would like to welcome Tash to the show.
Hi, Evelyn.
Yeah.
So good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming in today. Now, just want to start at the beginning. When did your interest in floristry start?
So I'm a musician. That was what I've done since I was quite young. And I was doing a lot of the gig circuit, and I still am, but I decided that I wanted to also try and get some other work going. And I initially started with a diploma of events and knew that I loved the hands-on element of events. Worked a few jobs in events that were very administrative. And then when I started planning my own wedding and a lot of my friends were getting married, I fell in love with, in particular, the floristry aspect. And I realized what a big umbrella events is. And I feel like that was what was always calling to me. It was something in more so like event design and aesthetics of events more than the planning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, making it pretty.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally understand. So when did you decide that you wanted to start your business?
It was probably around the time when quite a few of my friends were getting engaged. I started obviously being in those bridal parties. You start looking and then you start thinking about yourself, because I've been in a long-term relationship by that point. And then as like our engagement party and all those things kind of approached, I thought, you know what, I'm going to try my hand at this because I wanted to go quite big for our wedding florals.
Yeah.
And I knew that I just at that point like couldn't quite outlay the cost of what these Pinterest weddings have.
Oh, okay.
So like I really started educating myself. I was doing a lot of online courses and like paid courses and things like that. And that's where it started.
Okay. And so what year was that?
Like 2017.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I always tell my brides not to do their own flowers, but you did your own flowers. So how did that work?
Well, the first thing that I made sure of was, so with some wedding venues, it's the day that you get to set up, but others have a bit of a system where you get 3-day hire of the whole venue. So they won't book anything either side of your wedding.
Good, yeah.
And that was something I really tried to find when I was looking for a venue. I made sure that it was a venue that would allow me to come in the day before to do some setup.
Okay.
So that was the day that I did most of the major installations. It was end of April, so our anniversary was the 30th.
Oh, happy anniversary.
Thank you. And that allowed us to kind of not have the stress of doing it on the day. The only thing I couldn't do, which one of my dear friends did for me on the morning of, was the arbor, because essentially like it's out in the elements, wildlife, all kinds of things can get to it. That's the one thing that I made sure that I didn't have anything to do the morning of. Everything was done the day before. And
yeah, because I have seen brides scattering the day before, like getting things
Yeah.
ready. And a lot of them do things themselves, try to do the things themselves, but actually hire someone to do the bouquet
Yeah.
or, like you said, the flower arbor as well. So,
Yes.
so there you go. Those are tips around that if you decide to do your own flowers. But I think it's best if you do your own flowers if you have a little bit of experience. What have been the challenges around starting your floral business?
Initially, you really do need to build a portfolio, and you do feel like, oh, I can't charge people the industry standard because I need to build a portfolio to prove that I can execute the work. That is something that just takes time. Obviously, just gathering your tools and finding processes that are efficient. When I first started, it took me hours to do up quotes because I was just really overthinking it. But now I've streamlined it all and it just makes a much more efficient business.
You have another florist that helps you out, is that correct? Or do you try to do all of your own work?
For the majority of the time, I do most of my own work. But sometimes, for instance, I had a 3-wedding weekend due to postponements and everything in January. And yeah, you just need that extra help, those extra hands. So yeah, I'll get freelancers in when they're larger scale events. But generally, I try to do a lot myself, and always the focal items, such as like the bride's bouquet, the bouquets, the arbor, I really like to focus on those and make sure that I'm the one doing them.
Yeah. And what has been the best source of advertising for you and when you started up your floral business?
Well, I do find that Instagram's very effective.
Yeah.
I think just because it's such a visual platform, I find that most of my inquiries come either from Instagram, and if a venue that I've just worked out tag me, I get inquiries then from their upcoming brides. So I
Yes.
find that really helpful. Also, just kind of being preferred suppliers. There's a few venues, and I think that people really trust their venue and what their recommendations are.
Yep.
So
yep. Yeah, no, that's very, very true. Now, when you meet with the client, what sort of questions do you ask them? Because I know a lot of the times brides just come or couples come and say, I don't know, just make it pretty. But what are questions that you ask them?
my main starting point is I've got an inquiry form, and the most important things are obviously the location and date to check availability. And then I will often ask them, look, do you have any inspiration photos? Like photos that have really caught your eye that you love. Get them to attach those. Ask them about colour schemes because I find that's quite an important part of the day.
Yeah.
And I also do think that just by knowing their venue, you get a bit of a feel for what their style is already, because they wouldn't have booked that venue if they didn't love it aesthetically.
Yeah.
So sometimes if they go for a really rustic looking venue, it might give you a bit of insight already. And then when you have like more meetings down the track about aesthetics, you can show them like the endless pit of inspiration photos that you have and styles and overall themes, and it just kind of streamlines their thought process as well.
Okay. If a client wants a flower that's not in season, do you try to sway them to do another type of flower or another color, or how would that work? Like, actually, what flowers are in season? Maybe that would help.
Well, in general, you obviously get a lot of your pretty delicates and those like sweet peas and flannel flowers and all those things that are really reminiscent of like a garden in spring.
Yes.
And I guess that's why spring weddings are so popular. But then at the moment we're seeing beautiful dahlias, chrysanthemums. There's always stars of every season, just the showstoppers. And you can get roses all year round pretty much. For the most part, they're probably imported, and I try to mainly source local if I can. What I generally say to brides is try and not get too fixated on the actual variety.
Okay.
Let's work to a general color palette and an overall aesthetic. Like if you want more rustic natives or garden style cottage flowers.
Yeah.
And then we can kind of hone in on that, because like a story about my own wedding was I essentially had all these flowers that I'm like, this is my favorite flower. This is my favorite kind of rose. This is not a single one was in season, and not even just seasons affect it. Sometimes floods and
Yes, of course.
bushfires,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
I just went to the market and I just was like, okay, I'm not going to get exactly what I want. Let's just go for the color scheme. And now I look back at my photos and I wouldn't change my flowers. I love them.
They're amazing. I've seen
you.
your flowers on your wedding day, and I thought, oh my gosh, she's done them. Or now I know you didn't do the arbor, but you did everything else. So that's amazing. And of course you had Fiona and Bobby take the photos, and
Yes.
they're amazing
Amazing.
photographers. So they were able to capture the
Yes.
essence of your day. They also say with a bride's dress that the flowers, they should complement the dress.
Yes.
So do you take that into, like, if they say I'm wearing a blush type of dress, do you take that into consideration with the flowers, or?
Yes. Often brides will send me a photo of their wedding dress.
Yeah.
For the most part, I must have brides with really good sense of, color palettes, because they always seem to pick colors that are very cohesive with what everything is, what the bridesmaid dresses are,
Yep.
like, and what their like dresses tones are. I do tend to also go off the shape because
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, well, sometimes, like, for instance, I had a really straight line dress.
Yes, yeah.
So I did try and make my bouquet smaller because I didn't want it to, like, overarch the dress. And then I've had, some brides that have had really big princess style.
Yes.
And they've wanted that bouquet to kind of sprawl out so that it's kind of looking like it's sprawling through the dress.
Oh, wow. I would have never thought that, but that's really interesting to take that into account. Now, I know that some flowers have meanings, how, are brides really stuck on that? Like a meaning of a flower to have within their bouquet?
Not particularly in terms of what their Greek or like ancient Roman meaning was, but more so if it was, say, their grandma's favorite flower.
Okay.
Or,
okay.
very, like, I tend to find that when people want a very specific flower, it's quite a sentimental choice.
Okay.
Like, oh, my mum has peonies growing in her garden. Can we have peonies?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's always a lovely sentiment, and I always try to find them when I can. For the most part, people are really understanding about what, like, is seasonal. So
Yeah, exactly. So when someone is planning their wedding, what do you think are the most important floral arrangements that they should consider?
I definitely think anything that's going to get a lot of photograph time. A lot of people tend to have the mindset of, why am I going to spend all this money on flowers? They just die. I can understand that, but I also think that if you put your budget into those big pieces like your arbor and your bridal table and your bouquets,
Yeah.
and then go small on your guest tables and whatnot, those flowers will live on in the photos and the video. Flowers look their best in mass. So when you have a nice big dense arrangement, it's going to look really effective as opposed to doing more expensive urn style arrangements, but just one on each guest table. That's my general thought. And some people they've got the budget to do it all. For most people, it's not. And I think that definitely being able to put it all into those main features of the day is the best. And I would say furthermore, even more than your bridal table, your ceremony is really important, and obviously the bridal bouquet, because ceremony has it's when everything is still pristine in the day.
Yeah, because it's earlier in the day. So, wow, that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Because a lot of couples, they do spend a lot of money on their reception spaces, but you're right. The flowers are there for quite a few hours before everyone gets into the reception space. So the ceremony absolutely makes sense. Now, I was very grateful. I was able to do a ceremony with you in December, and the weather was a little bit weird and iffy. And I married a couple on the top of a cliff. And I usually say to couples, God, it's such a great view. You don't need flowers. However, I loved the way you did the floral arbor on this cliff top. So when you are giving couples advice, like if they say they're going to marry on a cliff top, what sort of flower advice do you give them?
Yeah, we did discuss the fact that there is obviously the wind factor.
Yep.
And it's completely bedrock, I guess,
Yes, it
that
is.
whole cliff. So there's no real rigging points where you can put tent pegs or anything for an arbor type structure. We did decide that the floor arbor was going to be safest and was going to be the most effective and also not block out the beautiful view.
Yeah.
But still just allow that little bit of whimsy, because I think without the arbor that was executed, it would have looked quite hard, especially because it was such an overcast day.
Yes, yes.
It just brought that little bit of softness, and
It did.
Fernanda was just so beautiful. And
Yeah.
I think that it really just, brought together her style and vision.
Yeah, it really did. So you worked with the bride on that, or did you give her that idea?
No, we worked on it, all three of us actually, the couple, So we worked on it kind of together, and we thought that's going to be the best option and also probably the safest in that scenario.
Yeah, and it was really windy that day.
Yeah.
So it worked really, really well. What about flower crowns? What do you think about flower crowns?
I love them.
I do too.
I think that they, it's funny because I make them in studio and I just put them on my head when I've, gotten up at 3 a.m. that morning to get the flowers and I'm tired and my makeup's not done and my hair's a mess. And I'm like, And then every time they put it on this beautiful bride with her hair perfectly done, I'm like, oh my God, it's so pretty. I think the thing with when I make flower crowns is I try to not make them too big. Yes. Unless someone specifically said that, I try and make mine dainty because it makes the whole look a bit softer and more bridal than costume.
Yeah.
But no, I love them.
Yeah, no, I loved that flower crown that she had on, and I love it when brides wear flower crowns,
Me
and
too.
yeah, it just gives it more of a regal sort of a look, or
Yes.
So yeah, are those actually in style now? Do you think, or is that something that everyone's going through now, or is it?
I've noticed that it's very dependent on the kind of wedding. Yeah, definitely more the rustic boho type weddings.
Yes.
They're very popular, but there's still obviously a lot of chic modern weddings, and I don't find that they're that popular with that style.
Okay.
But definitely I think we're seeing more of them now than what we did.
What about those boutonnieres that and the corsage? Do you think those are those things that brides couples should worry about as well, or maybe mainly focus on the bouquet?
Well, I do find that, sometimes people will inquire and be like, I need 11 boutonnieres for the groom, the groomsmen, the dads, the brothers. As lovely as it is to think of them, if you're trying to rein in the budget, maybe just go for the groom and groomsmen, or even just the groom. Sometimes it just gets a bit blown out. And the thing with those is they're quite time consuming to make.
They would be, because they're so delicate, aren't they?
Yeah. In some ways, I probably have 50-50 with the weddings that I book, where people do want to get it for closest family guests as well as the groomsmen.
Yeah.
And they want to get the mums the wrist corsages and everything. And I think that's lovely. But I also find that some people aren't worrying anymore. And they just think that, maybe I can just gift them something else that's going to long term.
Yeah. So what is a good estimate for budgeting flowers?
Most brides will find quite quickly when they're inquiring that most wedding vendors in general, but definitely florists, have a minimum spend.
Yes.
And that's because it just, we're not buying like a flower shop where we can break up bunches and absorb any kind of extra into our shop.
Yep.
We're having to go and buy whole bunches to make specific arrangements. And because of that, we have to make sure that a bunch of roses is getting absorbed across a few items. What I'm noticing at the moment is the trend is maybe around 2,500 to 3,000 for bridal party and ceremony, statement feature, and like a few other items through that kind of part of your day. And then it kind of steps up a bit from there to about 4 or 5, depending how big you want to go, if you want ceremony and bridal party and reception.
Okay.
But then there's also ways to reuse flowers and a lot of conversations that you can have with your florist to make the budget work for you.
Okay.
So I think it's really important that brides have an idea
Yes,
of their
course.
budget. I think that most florists are quite willing to make it work for them and get the most out of that budget for them.
I'm sure a lot of couples come to you. They might just say, "What's the cheapest you can do for this amount?" Is that what a lot of couples do?
Some couples do, and I think that a lot of people do get a bit amazed by the initial quotes because they don't realize the time that it takes just to make a bridal bouquet and stuff like that. But for the most part, people are quite understanding, and I don't know if it is all of these resources that we have now, like Easy Weddings, and you know, they kind of give you budgets and they tell you this is what you should expect to pay.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that those resources have been really helpful because it's making people not go in blind and then they're not kind of angry at you.
Yeah.
And you just quote them what is quite a like standard price.
Yeah.
But yeah, this whole idea about like the wedding tax.
Yes.
I think it's definitely not. It's not a thing. Wedding vendors work extremely hard in a limited amount of time because particularly with flowers as a perishable, you can really only start prepping them on the Wednesday.
Exactly.
And there's so many logistics and there's so many aspects to the day. People are really understanding and they're starting to kind of, I mean, it's not like it was maybe 20 years ago where people really had no idea what they should expect. We've got so many great
resources out there. Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people think they can do it themselves. But when they start looking at putting it together, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work. So I've seen brides who didn't get a florist and went to the flower market and they're setting up at, during the rehearsal and they are stressed out of their head.
Yeah.
And then I've noticed the next day they've put the flowers in the vases because they were over it. So sometimes brides don't realize the work involved,
It's hours and hours and just the preparation and
yeah.
So it's definitely good to have a team that you can rely on. But as well, like I think it's important as a wedding vendor to be respectful of people's budgets and not try and push them. When they say, this is what we can afford, but trying to make it as special as you can for them. And make their budget really stretch and get them what is best for their day.
For their day. Now, Tash, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, well, first, how far do you travel?
Oh, I go quite far. I mean, in my general rates, Blue Mountains is quite, easy for me. I'll even go out to like Central West, Bathurst, all those kinds of areas. And then I do a lot in the Southern Highlands, the Central Coast. Yeah, kind of that north, kind of northern beaches, the city. And I have had a few inquiries for the Hunter, but obviously the travel expenses start to...
Yeah, they start to creep up a bit. So you've got to be aware of that as well. So if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
I mean, I get a lot of people contacting me initially through Instagram, and I'm totally fine with that. My website has got pretty much all my resources on it.
Okay.
And it has got my inquiry form, also my email if you would prefer to just write up an email. That would be the best way. So it's www.theflowercottage.com.au.
Excellent. And I'm going to put all of this information in the show notes. So if anybody wants to get in contact with you and also your Instagram as well, so they can have a look at your sort of style. So before we end, we're coming to the end. I'd like to you have described your arrangements or something you've described from a Renaissance painting. What inspires you from a Renaissance painting?
I think I just love the fact that it looks like a memory. It looks nostalgic.
Yeah.
And just the the haziness and the fluffiness of those beautiful oil paintings.
Yeah.
I've always loved them. I actually have an entire Pinterest folder saved of just Renaissance paintings of like beautiful women in flowers.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think there was just something so natural and organic about the styling that really appeals to me.
Yeah.
And I really like it when flowers look natural and like they're almost growing out of their vessels.
So you're saying romantic and wild in spirit.
Yes.
So you like that as well. So I love that description. Well, was there anything else you wanted to share or say anything?
Not really. Get in touch if you have any questions about florals. I love it. It's my passion. So, you know, it's not just a job for me, and I could talk about it for hours, and I love to be able to help people in making everything as they like it. So
Yeah. No, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thanks. Thank you so much for your company. Please tune in next week to Life's Rich Tapestry, where you will hear another courageous conversation spoken from the heart.